good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. I hope everyone enjoyed it. So I will be moderating the Housing Justice and Tenants Rights panel. So we have an amazing group of panelists here today. So I'll just go down the line. I'll introduce them and say if they're with an organization, and then I'll let them tell you a little bit more about themselves and their organization. So right here to my left, I have Mika Gadsden, community partner of Friends of Gadsden Creek. So Mika, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'll keep it short so that the rest of the panelists can also introduce themselves. I'm Mika Gadsden. I'm an area advocate, organizer, and co-chair with Friends of Gadsden Creek. But today I'm here as a community partner. I'm excited to talk more about ways forward for our residents, renters, and homeowners to some extent, but renters being able to realize true housing justice through more advocacy, but of course with the fighting for more rights. And so that's been a large part of my work with Friends of Gadsden Creek. It's environmental justice, but through our tenants meetings that Michaela's been an instrumental part of, we've been able to help folks, educate and empower folks to advocate for themselves in public housing and throughout the West Side.
And now we have Matthew Billingsley, who is an attorney and head of the housing unit at the South Carolina Legal Services. Matthew, would you like to introduce yourself for me?
Sure. Is this working? Yeah. I'm Matt Billingsley with South Carolina Legal Services.
No, it might be quiet. You can try.
Yeah.
We'll use this one, it's better. South Carolina Legal Services is we're a statewide nonprofit law firm. We represent people in civil cases and civil actions. We don't do anything that's more like car accidents, of course, things like that, and then criminal. I'm the head of the housing unit for the state. We primarily do various types of law, but primarily in housing, evictions, anywhere from it could be actions related to that in federal court all the way down to master court, evictions, appeals, things like that. Defending evictions, defending foreclosures, and along those lines, and have a lot of experience with public housing and subsidized housing.
Well, I'd like to say perfect afternoon to everyone. My name is Henrietta Woodward, and I am the Executive Director of the Community First Land Trust. We are a 4-year-old organization in Charleston and North Charleston, and we provide what we call permanent affordable housing, because when we develop housing and we sell it to homeowners, we retain ownership of the land. And it's a nice process that when those that are able to buy on the market, they can sell and then move on the market, but they also have to leave a portion of an equity in that house that they're moving out of so that the next family can afford it. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
My name is Penny Cummings. I use they, them pronouns. I organize the South Carolina Housing Justice Network. Our primary work is how do we take the ideas that we're living with as tenants and folks that are deeply impacted by housing and do something about it? How can we realize that? We know that people that are closest to the problem are actually closest to the solution. So our big priority is making sure that our neighbors have someone in their corner rallying with them that would take those ideas and would take them to the seat of power. So that might be to the mayor's office, that might be to the state house, that might be to the White House. We've done all of those things to make sure that there are better tenant protections and better realities for ourselves and our neighbors.
Okay, thank you guys so much. So now I have actually fielded some questions from residents on what to ask these folks. So I have a list of topics. It's quite lengthy, so hopefully we can get through all of them. But I do want to spend some time talking about evictions, because that's often a concern among tenants. And this might be more geared towards Matthew. So what are some of the things that Housing Authority can evict a tenant for?
So, for a housing authority in general, you can be referring to mostly public housing with the housing authority. you know, there's different regulations and different types, but they all have the same theme. They have to evict you for a substantial violation of the lease or material breach of the lease is the language that they'll see. Usually in the model lease, it's all listed in paragraph 23, so that's what they do. The material breach, though, can be either kind of a major lease violation. It can also be repeated minor violations that violate health, safety, or the management of the project, or something like that. The repeated ones would have to be repeated, not just a few little things to add up, but that same thing repeated, you know, multiple times that could then lead to an eviction. Other things that go in there are criminal activity. Usually there's a lot of cases that come up with either drug-related criminal activity or criminal activity that threatens the health and safety of other residents. Oftentimes that comes up not just with the household member, but a guest or somebody comes over there to cause a problem. Non-payment of rent, even though, you know, rent might be reduced, one big issue that I see is people getting behind on rent, maybe because they did not recertify or they didn't notify the housing authority to recertify. If you don't notify the housing authority of a change in income or a change downward in income, then you're still responsible for that rent during that time, and that can become a problem for non-payment of rent. They cannot just say, we want to not renew your lease because we just don't want to, or anything like that. But for me, and what I see the majority of the time, there's either rent issues that are related to the recertification process or interim recertification, and also a lot of criminal activity, whether it's and the vast majority, I'd say, is guests or somebody that's there as a friend of a friend or something like that for that kind of activity. It's not supposed to be easy to do an eviction for public housing or subsidized housing, but as far as what to look out for, you really have to be on your toes about and be aware of who's coming around the unit, who's coming around from not just you, but a friend of your friend, something like that. Some people kind of assume, well, it's not me or my household, so they can't really do anything about it, but that's not really true. Somebody coming on the grounds of the apartment complex or, you know, really anywhere, if they're there because of you, it can all come back to you. There's a lot of more that we can, and we could make, you know, a whole day or something over what there is, what avenues you have to defend it. Different types of activity might require them to send you a notice with a right to cure or a way to resolve it. When you're dealing with a housing authority, and I think, because I think, you know, Gaston Creek is public housing, so the City of Charleston Housing Authority, they have an administrative plan as well. So there's it's an administrative continued occupancy policy kind of book. They call it an ACOP for public housing, and it might be online. Sometimes they have it on their website. They're supposed to make those things accessible to tenants and to residents, and that goes in a lot of detail of what they say they're going to do in certain situations or what their policy is, because HUD sometimes also gives them discretion whether or not they can evict. Sometimes they have to use their discretion on whether or not they should. There's a list of factors that they say they're going to consider. Those are all things to be aware of. Also to be aware of us in legal services. We're a free attorney, you can apply. And the reason is that can give you some really good grounds of things you're not thinking of. I've plenty of times had housing authorities not know their own policy and not really, but they have to review it. We did have a case in the Court of Appeals that confirmed they've got to actually consider these factors and things when they're doing an eviction. But it has to be something big, usually.
Can you all hear me? Okay, so.
It's not as loud as that.
Okay. So building off of that, I think a common theme among tenants is that they speak out against the housing authority. They stand the chance of being evicted. So there's like this retaliation fear. So what can tenants do if they feel like the housing authority is retaliating against them? For anyone who wants to answer. Can you?
I think.
Oh, there's a switch.
Turn it up, yeah.
Hello? Oh, there. I think there's a ping pong that we'll do, because I want to answer this as an organizer, and there are legal things that you can do around that. One is like, one of the things that Matt made around like evictions is like, there has to be documentation of something happening. So in the same way that the housing authority, your landlord will say, we're trying to evict you for this reason, this is how we know this has happened, you as a tenant should be documenting your own journey about the things that you're up to. So like, even if it's something simple, like I went to the front office and I asked about this thing, right? Or I picked up the phone and I called about this thing, document that date, document who you spoke with, because you have rights like to organize as folks that are living in public housing, but you also have rights to express your complaints or concerns. So documentation is one thing. And then I want to say something that's probably a little bit controversial. The reality of like living in public housing and being a tenant in this current moment means that you are being retaliated against. Rent is going up, there are policies that don't actually fit your concerns, and that's all like hard. Like those are daily lived realities when you get the letter about rent increase or when the maintenance person has not come out to do what they need to do. Like those all can feel like retaliation because of where you actually live. So I want for folks to be really mindful of like whether you speak up for yourself or you don't speak up, you're living under something that doesn't feel good a lot of the times. Particularly like in the place that you all live. Like there are real big concerns that I saw in y'all's demands back that I was like, oh, whether I say something about it or I don't say something about it, I'm living under something that doesn't feel great. But there is like a form of like compliance process, like where if you feel like you are being retaliated and there's a phone line, there's a way to do that. I'm not as familiar with that process, so that Matt can probably speak better to that, but I want to be really clear that the current conditions in which you're living under is like a form of retaliation. And so I want folks to think about that even when they're thinking about, well, what happens if you already are living like in spaces that don't feel great. So the risk is worth it. And there are actual legal protections in place if you're doing your due diligence around documenting how you make your concern known.
If I can talk a little bit about documentation. When you're documenting, make sure that you have the date, the time, whoever was present, everything you said, and everything someone else said to you. So that when you take this documentation, a lot of people will not remember what they've said, but you have written it down. And so when you can open up your notebook and say, well, on this day, that day, this time, you were here, someone else was here. I had a friend that was fired from Charleston County some years ago, and we went to then Lonnie Hamilton was a councilman, and he said, okay, he'd given me all of the paperwork that they had gave you. Now tell me, how did you reply? Where's your answers? She didn't have anything. And he said, well, there's nothing I can do for you, because if you signed those documents when they were saying that you weren't performing up to their standards, and you did not answer that complaint, then that tells me you accepted what they said to you. So make sure that you just write, if you were bad mouth, whatever you said, write it down, whatever they said, write it down, date it and time it, and keep it in a secure place. I had a friend who was having some problems at work, and I said, go to the store, buy a black and white composition pad, write everything down, and put it in a secure place in your house.
I mean, I'd say as far as the legal side, it might depend on what the retaliation is or what's the basis of the retaliation that you're talking about. The law covers retaliation when somebody's asking for a repair or somebody's asking for some kind of compliance with the Landlord-Tenant Act. The requirements of the landlord to do certain things or to keep a place in a state of good repair, or somebody's requesting repairs. If they get retaliated against by getting a termination letter or a threat to end the lease or some kind of thing like that, that can carry with it damages of 3 times what the monthly rent would be, not necessarily what you pay, but maybe the contract rent. It has some other things that go into it. I mean, that law though is not really written with public housing in mind. It's written for like, thinking about just general private landlord tenant kind of things. If you're talking about for other reasons, or if you feel you're being retaliated against for other reasons, there could be other avenues to pursue. It could be things like, complaining to HUD, having a HUD complaint, or some things like that. I've seen some tenants kind of do well getting together and complaining to HUD about certain conditions, not just in public housing, sometimes also in project-based Section 8, this might be a private company running it. And I've had some where I got a notice when I helped a few people on an eviction that the evictions were canceled and terminated because HUD came down and basically told the apartment complex, you better dismiss all your evictions right now, and we're going to look at all this stuff. So sometimes, the more numbers can have an effect on that, especially with somebody with like HUD or HUD Office in Columbia. But it can also come up in evictions and things like that as maybe a motivation for why they are filing something. Again, with the housing authority, they have a whole list of what they're supposed to consider and whether they should do an eviction. So I always tell people too to document, not as making your notes, but if you go talk to the housing authority about something, with the caseworker or the property manager, send an email. Make sure you have their, whether it's the general email or whatever, just send an email that confirms what you talked about. Good to talk to you today about X, Y, and Z, because you can use that later in a case, or if I'm helping somebody with an eviction, that can be great evidence to use, something to cross-examine the housing authority about. Because people will go in, I've had clients go in and say, here's my income went down, okay, they never did anything about it, and now they're saying you owe all this money in rent when it should have been lowered before, and people who have no information that they ever turned anything in are then kind of at a disadvantage. So, but it's important to document like they're saying, but think about where that retaliation is coming from. Anything that's related to fair housing, is a whole different dynamic of where you could go with it. Repairs may be one of the bigger things when they're not doing repairs, not doing what they're supposed to, and you're raising some issues about that and then feel like they're coming after you. And sometimes it can feel like if you do anything wrong, they can try to turn it into a big deal and turn it into a notice. I think a lot of times I've seen them send notices hoping that somebody will just get scared and leave, even if they don't really have a case.
Yeah, I think that's really important, documenting everything. Is there anything you wanted to add? Okay. So moving on to accessibility concerns, because that's always a concern among tenants as well. So if a tenant needs special accommodations, like for example, they use a wheelchair, does the housing authority have to meet those accommodations? And if so, what resources do tenants have to ensure that the housing authority provides those accommodations? And then whoever feels comfortable to answer.
Well, the easy start of that, and yeah, they're supposed to have accessibility and things like that. As far as things like wheelchairs and all, they would have to have accessibility. If you need a reasonable accommodation or something like that, they're supposed to also comply with that. That requires usually a written notice. In general, it comes up a little more depending on to what level maybe a change or an accessibility issue there is, to what they might have to do as far as the cost, and if there's going to be kind of do something burdensome or something like that. If things are not going well with that, I mean, your avenue, and one of them is doing a fair housing complaint to the HUD office. They usually do take in fair housing complaints. I'm not sure how well they go. Obviously, but your other option in that too, with fair housing and those violations, might be consulting with an attorney. I don't typically file cases where we're going after money or something like that. I'm a lot more eviction defense, but that is one avenue to go. And I would say don't always just focus on just one way to solve that problem. There might be multiple ways. The housing authorities are a quasi-governmental agency. They're a little bit different, but you might be able to talk to your local rep, maybe the state rep, the senator or something like that, that could, when those issues are coming up, if it's not working to do the fair housing complaint or something like that, or trying to consult an attorney.
Yeah, and now we'll switch gears and talk about something called the Rental Assistance Demonstration, also known as RAD, which folks on the panel can definitely explain better than I. But I know just like a very basic definition, a program that allows public housing agencies to invest in public housing units, basically to prevent them from being demolished, developed, eventually leaving residents of these public housing units to be displaced. So firstly, Nika, you probably can speak more to this. How does RAD work? What is it exactly? What exactly is it supposed to accomplish?
Yeah, well, admittedly, I haven't really engaged with RAD here in quite some time, so I can't, maybe someone else on the panel can give me more of a explanation as to how it works, but I can say that like with a number of other things that we see occur within our municipal government, whether it's a TIF, right, whether it's like the King Street bid, these things on their face don't always have to mean something, they should mean something inherently bad, but we know that the powers that be, the way that the status quo works, is that, to your point in terms of your explanation, folks who are in public housing, they may be displaced, they may be exploited, and given how development trends are in this area, that's not unlikely. What I would do, how I've engaged with RAD in previous years, prior to my time with Charleston, prior to my time with the Friends of Gadsden Creek, is just trying to help residents organize themselves to understand what RAD is and what it isn't. They're on the horizon here in Charleston. We know that this new administration, along with, I'm sure, the Housing Authority, there's an opportunity here to do something good with at least the framework of RAD. But again, it's not, it's okay to feel skeptical about that, given what we've seen across the country. In a recent meeting, I pointed some of my peers to a movement effort in places like Minnesota, where residents have organized and mobilized to make sure that they fight off displacement. And again, I know other panelists will be able to speak to what RAD is and what it could potentially do or mean for residents of Gadsden Green. But I would encourage residents to organize and familiarize yourself with other areas, whether it's in the Southeast or in those other regions like Minnesota, places where you see successful movement work, where folks have fought back and fought for their rights to retain housing in the neighborhood that they choose. But I'll pass it to someone else on the panel.
Well, I really don't know. I know a little about it because I work in affordable housing. So, but I do know from what I have seen across the country that residents of public housing, when they go in and they're going to demolish and rebuild, a lot of times they are not able to go back. And residents aren't being told that when they are able to go back, there's some qualifications. You have to be working, you have to have good credit, and a number of other things that it's almost like you're going through a private project manager. Housing authority, for most part, will not be administering those units. And so it's just like I'm going out on a private market and trying to get an apartment. And that's what you're going to have to do to qualify to get back in those units. And a lot of people are not aware of that. And so it's going to have to be education, education, and education, and keeping up with what RAD does. And continually seek your housing authority for more information. The education that is needed for the resident is not out there. They're not doing it. They're not educating you on, you think you might be going back. You think, because when they go in and they develop new housing, they're not building enough for you to go back. It's going to be a percentage of houses that's going to be set aside for low income or mid income. So you got to be aware of that too. I have a friend right now that the housing authority moved her out of one unit into another unit because they're going to redo her unit. And they have told her that you're going to be able to go right back there in that unit, and that's not true. It's not true.
I think the best way to think about RAD is like, if we have a problem that buildings are not being maintained, and the government got together and thought through it, there was an option introduced of like, how do we keep and renew buildings? Well, how we do that is to bring in like private developers and other folks who have funding to do that. So like the idea in itself is a decent idea. We're gonna get somebody else to hold this space, we're gonna renovate it, and there are things and processes in place for folks to have input in the process, but just like any other government process, things are confusing, right? Like, and just because they put out a notice doesn't mean everybody got it. So like the power of like what can happen in RAD properties is like, I've seen where there is a tenant organization or union, they're being able to actually make demands and walk with one another so that everyone gets to the meeting. And so that there are conversations, and so that if there are qualifications on the back end, people know that, but also we know that when renovation happens, it takes time, so life is in between, so you might not meet those original qualifications or things of that nature. So I think like RAD is like a solution that is really complicated and actually really hard, and when we don't have the community buy-in and conversations, we are really at a disservice there. It's like my experience of like RAD properties, there are all kinds of really cutesy videos online right now that walk you through what RAD is, but those are often produced by like our federal government, so they have a certain lean to them. But what I'll say is like, it's a solution that was meant to be creative, that like allows for, even though they're not being managed by public housing, for you still to have the rights under public housing. Like, which is a lot different than if you were to leave and go to a regular private landlord. So it's like a really, it's like the same way Matt was like, we can spend the whole day talking about eviction, we can spend the whole day talking about RAD. But I think like what's important to note is like there are like places for community input, but if the community is not organized, then.
And that's why I wanted to jump back in, because both of you speaking like brought back a memory. So years back when there were rumblings of RAD coming to Charleston in different locations, one thing was abundantly clear was the outreach. But I think by law, housing authority has to pick, right? And like I read the paper, I read the actual paper, just that's what I do. But you have to go all the way back to the classified ads, near the vote ads, or something like that, to find the listing from the housing authority. Most people are not doing that.
Right.
That's not how we get our information, typically. And so that was one barrier to your point. If organizations like ours, Friends of Gas Creek, or any organization that we all represent, we have to be able to help amplify the information that folks need, and then dispense that and organize that community as paramount. But the other thing that Kenya mentioned, that I was part of a recent conversation about the partners, the way what you can predict for RAD properties, look at who your local municipality is engaging to be the property manager and even developer. When I ran for mayor, one thing I tried to advocate for, of course, was affordable housing, meaning because I don't have access to affordable housing, or at least I didn't. And part of that was looking at pathways forward, and there were my fellow peers and Friends of Gas Creek that pointed out these other ways that we can build affordable housing. And there were a slew of affordable housing developers of all sizes, small scale, large scale. And so it's incumbent upon us to talk to our municipal government leadership and say, hey, there's this group, this is property management group in Georgia that's doing some amazing work, and they have this excellent reputation that spans 2 decades. We try to get your lawmakers to be receptive to those ideas, people who specialize in small scale affordable housing, but specific to RAD. Make sure that your municipal government leadership is also listening to some of these more reputable property management groups who are not just going to leave after throwing up some shoddy, being a part of a thing where shoddy construction is thrown up and then they just make their profit and they bounce, or just collect the checks and don't take care of the property. So that's important.
I would just also say that when Nika talked about finding someone like in Minnesota. I know Richmond, Virginia has implemented a successful grad program. So don't be afraid to reach out to people outside of your arena and find out what happened, the steps that they took to make this very successful. And you have to lean hard on your representatives. You know, don't let them just say something to you and they don't return. A few months ago, there was like a public meeting at the City of North Charleston City Hall, Town Hall, in reference to, what's the name of the project? Oh, which one?
In North Charleston.
No, the projects,
Answer, what'd you say?
right across the street from Burke, almost. Gas and Green.
Sorry.
So they have these young women out there testifying about the conditions of their home. And I mean, I went because I was interested and they had publicized it. These women told intimate, personal stories about themselves and what was going on with them with the housing authority. And so when I left, I thought, well, what are they going to do with this information? The representatives that were there. And I sent an email, a text message to one that I knew, and I said, I really appreciate that you guys came out and listened to these women and a few gentlemen, their stories. Where do you go from here? He text messaged me back and said, good morning, thank you. And that is all they've said. So if you know of any of those women that have been out there, what they need to do is ask for a follow-up. We poured out our souls to you, all of our personal information. What are you going to do with that? And you can demand that they do that. You know how you do that? You call them every day. You text them every day. You can't get weary if you want success.
Well, thank you so much. So another thing I want to talk about is the heat study. That was brought up in an earlier panel. And that's been a great cause of concern, just the heat in Gadsden Creek. So the heat study found that Gadsden Green is like one of the most intense heat on the peninsula. So my question for the panelists, what does this extreme heat in this area mean for Gadsden Green tenants? So how does this affect them, their utility bills, their health?
Utility bills are outrageous.
I'm gonna say.
I was like, y'all know how it impacts y'all, like what my utility bill.
I did
From the earlier.
from June to October.
Yeah.
My light bills are over $200. And my apartment is a one-bedroom apartment. I am just one single person in there. I work 8 hours of the day. And what was put in our apartments 3 to 4 years ago was a humidifier that jumps on and off by itself. That jacks our electricity bill that way. And then when it comes summertime, we have no place to escape the heat but in our houses. And we have to burn our air conditioning. And so my little teeny tiny man, my apartment is not even as big as this auditorium. And I'm paying $200, close to $300 between the months of June and October. And I think it's unfair that we were not asked, do we want a humidifier that's going to jump on and off with our electricity bills? You know, I didn't think that was feasible. And HUD nationwide is sitting on $10 million, and all Gadsden Green is asking for is some trees. We want to know why we can't get them.
Right. No, absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Angela. Yes, for giving voice to that. Earlier, I think that topic was broached earlier. I'd say this: there's two things about the recent heat study, at least the publicity that it received, that concerned me. There were key people that we're in this room, Friends of Gadsden Creek. There are key people that we trust and know that were part of some of that. Unfortunately, I feel like some of that good intention was co-opted by some other folks with an agenda or with, with a stake in the game. Meaning that they took the sample size of the study, which already told us what we already know. Gadsden Green is the hottest area on the peninsula because it has no shade trees. They're attacking that natural resource that is the creek. Mr. Rowland spoke earlier about the breeze you get off the Ashley River, right? All of that is being interrupted by the development there, right? So we know why it's hot. You just look at what happened over the last 20 years. But there's this sense of urgency now, which is real, but it's being used to displace potentially without a plan to make sure that we rectify the issues. When day in, day out, as recent as yesterday, residents have reached out to us about they just want basic amenities taken care of. They just want basic things like maintenance requests. They want those things satisfied. And residents are not being listened to, and they're definitely not being asked whether or not they want a humidifier, in their unit. And it speaks to this culture here where if you're not an owner of property, you're not listened to. If you're a renter, and especially if you're in public housing, you're not being listened to. We have to continue to fight for this is why it's important for environmental groups everywhere, especially the homogenous ones that lack diversity, right? It's important that environmental justice be a part of the conservation and the environmental advocacy. Because when you don't have folks across income, across race and class, when you don't have them in the room, you can't advocate for things like, hey, well, when you redevelop the west side, can it look like what Joshua Robinson drew up for Gadsden Green? Can it include trees? Can you include the creek and also other natural amenities where people can enjoy outdoor space? Can you have benches? Can you have some sort of shaded, outdoor space? These are things that we've seen drawn up for Gadsden Green as an alternative to what developers have planned. And so we need to continue to advocate for folks, but let them advocate for themselves and not let these other voices come and co-opt this message. But we are concerned about the heat. We need more trees. Those units need to be refurbished, and there need to be a little bit more shaded outdoor spaces in this area specifically.
So I have a few more questions, but I actually want to open it up to the audience at this point, since we're running out of time a little bit, just to see if anyone else has any questions in the audience.
My question is about, with being on public housing, how do you acquire having a balance? Now, in October, the management on President Street called me and told me, Ms. Washington, you are over $1,000 in debt. And I asked her, how could that be possible? At that time, I was working for the College of Charleston, so when the college goes into summer break, we, as employees, are furloughed. Once we're furloughed, you take the information that you have, that you get from your job, you take it to the office. You might have to pay May's rent, but you're not entitled, you're not subjected to pay rent until you go back to work. Okay, so June, July, August, September, I was not working, I was furloughed. But this woman insisted that I owed over $1,000, and I was asking her how. And I wanted her to explain to me why. Then, when I finally, because I turned in all the right documentation when I left the college and I started working somewhere else. I gave them all the documentation, the day that I started working, my first 3 paychecks, all that. So then it was said to me that I didn't owe them because there was a negative side in front of the $1,252.63. And I want to know, how did I acquire that balance? And then when January came in, they showed me how they deduct all that $1,200, and now I got a balance of $14. Can you explain that to me? How did it do?
Pay that $14 to keep on moving.
It went from $1,200 to now that I have a balance of $14.
I'll pay that
I was
$14
being
to keep on
furloughed
moving.
for June, July, August, and September. They should have not taken any money from out of that balance because I was furloughed and I didn't have any income. So can you explain any of that?
There's no way to really tell you about your individual case why your ledger is the way your ledger is. But the one thing I'd point out is it doesn't hurt to get a copy of your ledger and look at it, or even get someone to help look it over to see what is going on with it. And the reason I say that is the housing authority and virtually every landlord I've seen or dealt with does it the easy way of having one ledger for everything. But they really should have a dual type ledger of one being rent and one being other stuff. Because if they charge you, like if somebody flushes a kid's toy down the toilet and has to pay $100 for a fix, they will list that on the ledger. And the way that a lot of those systems work is as soon as you pass the deadline to say paid rent or any amount of rent, whether you're paying zero rent or whatever, it'll trigger a late fee. But they can't charge a late fee on something that's not rent. And I've dealt with that several times. I've really dealt with that with the housing authority. They can't charge late fees on those other things. They'll have to go in there and manually change them, but I've had them not change stuff until we're at court. And they go, yeah, we looked at it and we took all these off. I had somebody with a good amount of money, they took everything off because they'll charge late fees accidentally. Because, think about how many people in public housing, the amount of people who are the caseworkers and looking at that, they would have to go in and manually reverse those. So sometimes if you accidentally get a balance or there's a mistake, they have to go in and manually reverse all those little $15 charges and things like that. There's been issues where they're sometimes charge people in different areas for not pulling their trash can back. If they're related to duplex, I want to charge you for not pulling the trash can back. I've argued with them. I've looked up stuff. I've talked to people in other states and attorneys in other states about that, where there's not really a good solution. But I've seen really bizarre things in ledgers, charge for this, charge for that. You also, if you're a zero renter, you're getting probably a utility check. So that utility check, the way it works on the ledger is it will show as a utility check coming in and a utility check coming out, going out. So sometimes things get just a little bit messy with that. And there's just not really probably somebody over there reviewing everybody's for mistakes. I couldn't tell you why they're saying some large amount, then reversing it. And then the $14, there's no telling.
They deducted it down to now where I have a balance of $14. But they have a list of what it is, but I'm not understanding any of it because again, like I said, working with the College of Charleston, when the children go home in the summertime, we are furloughed and we don't pay rent until we go back to work. And you have to have proof, 3 check stubs and things, and I do all those things. So I'm not understanding how they come to determine what they do. It just seems shady. And that's a nice word to use.
It is, they really would have to just look through it and see and try to figure out. Because that's what I've had to do with molds and appliances.
I'll bring it back to you.
You can apply for us and then we'll talk about it. We'll look
Okay.
at the ledger and I can email their attorney and she'll kind of say not again. But there's any of those ledgers, they're hard to sometimes read too well because what they do is they still charge you the rent and then credit the rent because that's what's coming in. And utility allowances change. HUD sets those, and they can change from time to time. And so it's based on what then your total tenant payment is supposed to be minus the utility allowance, and then what either they send you or whether you pay or whether you pay zero and all that. But it's usually, in my experience, there's something else, something weird, or maybe some other little mistake that's causing the ripple. And they don't always really look at it or do anything about it until like somebody brings it to me and I email and say, what's the problem?
Thank you. My question is maybe geared more towards Ms. Henrietta and perhaps Kenya. From earlier presentations today, we've learned about the seizure of private property from Black homeowners in this area and its conversion to racially segregated public housing, and that's still the public housing we have today. It's predominantly Black. And I'm wondering from an ownership perspective, thinking beyond just basic maintenance and minimal asks of the city, like not being displaced from your home, for a campaign that wants to dream bigger, what should we be demanding and thinking about and imagining in terms of reinstituting Black wealth and ownership and power in this community? And what does that look like in practice of reparations, of ownership? And maybe since Henrietta and Kenya, you're putting this into practice, would love to hear from you both.
Well, my first thought is that we need to create a land bank. Get vacant land or land where houses are demolished or not repaired. And if the city owns it, put it in what we call a land bank. Or if you could get private owners to put it in a land bank. And what you do then is create a system where not-for-profit organization and even for-profit organization could have access to that land specifically to develop affordable housing. Under the land trust that I work with, we had a mitigation agreement with the State Forest Authority because of environmental injustice that 7 communities was going to be adversely affected because the authority was going to move on the old base. And so with some fundings that we received, we were able to go out, purchase land, put it in a land bank, and then when my organization or another organization was ready to develop that, we had land. And when we developed, we retained ownership of that land. That way, there will be land always available for development. I just met on yesterday with a group from the Habitat, and they're facing a problem in that they can't afford land any longer. They have money to develop, but the cost of the land would cause the houses to be increasingly more higher. And for the people that they want to serve, because they only serve families at 60% or below. And it has to be very, very affordable. So I would think that creating a land bank, that families that own, Black families that own their land, that they put their land in a land trust, a family trust, so it will not. Don't give anyone an idea of selling the land, and they need to secure the land. But the city, I would think that when you can go out, most city government have a list of land that they own. I just secured a list that the city of North Charleston owns, and we're going to go through that and go to the mayor and say, these are in our area of service. Give them to us. And they have been gracious and have given us a few lots, but we want all of them. And we want all of them because we deserve all of them, because most individuals that you see are that needs housing are Black and brown people.
It's my most radical thought or dream for Charleston is for folks to own apartment buildings. Like the folks that live there to own them and to manage them. And I've seen it happen, not in a public housing space yet, but I think those things are possible. I think asking for our most radical dreams, demanding them, creates opportunity and possibility for what it could look like. I think also having greater conversations around what is the land allocated for years to come is also another conversation to be had, because it's there's so many stories in the Tri-County around places that were like spaces of Black wealth that are now been decimated in lots of different ways. And so I think like my biggest is like what I think is okay, but like really what do you want? And then how can we think through how that is actually happening? Because there are lots of big dreams around what housing looks like happening all over the country, and like those folks that are doing that work actually want to come to South Carolina. So we have friends in Denver that are wanting to come down and talk to us, and friends in the Bay that are like, when y'all are ready, we'd love to come and walk with you and talk to you about how do we manifest the vision. So like my big thing is like, what do y'all want? And then like, how can we think through it together? Like I made a commitment to step earlier, like whenever there's a moment of like confrontation of like, how do we get the things that you all want? South Carolina Housing Justice Network has your back. Like, we're going to come out and make the noise and to stand with you. So like, my big invitation is like, what is the vision? And what is y'all's deepest desire? Because trees, I feel like we should be able to get some trees. Like me. I'm one of those people like Miss Henrietta said that will make a phone call like every day. And I have other peers who will do that too. So I think like whatever y'all's vision is, like that's possible. But I know like part of my vision for like South Carolina Housing Justice Network is to support the idea of like deep social housing. So some of the things that Ms. Henrietta was talking about, but also some other configurations of like how do we have control over the place that we live in, because we know what's best for that space. We've lived there the longest.
I would also want to add is that if you can find a piece of property that was previously owned by Black or brown people, ask for it back. An example is Vance Wilson High School in North Charleston was given to the Charleston County school system to build a school for Black students. And right now where that land is, that land was given by to the school district by 4 Black freedmen.
On Liberty Hill.
And on Liberty Hill. And right now, maybe the school has 5% of Black students there. The second example is in Union Heights, where I grew up. An interstate went through, directly through our neighborhood. And now that land has been abandoned. And we had been asking the former mayor for that land back since 2016. Well, the new mayor, we're talking, and it's very evident that that community will receive that land back, and we will be able to build 30 to 40 units of housing. So ask for your land back.
Just to tie that up into a little bow, as you read my mind, Ms. Henrietta, there are other cities that they may be imperfect blueprints, but they provide a framework. So Portland, several years back, they had a right to return policy. Now, it wasn't well executed, but the intention was there. For those who don't know, Portland is historically known for being very discriminatory, gentrification ran rapid, but more importantly, a very harsh city for African Americans. And so many African American families were displaced. And so their right to return policy, what they sought to do was to repair some of that harm. If you can prove that your resident, your family lived there, if you can prove whatever documentation, photos, otherwise, you had a right to return. Now we don't have that here in Charleston, but that's a starting place where we can start asking for that land back. And if not for residential use, you perhaps could advocate for policy where you could deem an area, like right now the Human Affairs and Racial Conciliation Commission, they were working on something called the Renaissance District, right? Where a certain area of Charleston would be designated as a Renaissance District. And so there was a lot of things attached to it, not perfect, but it's a great place to start. Like, hey, can we designate certain areas and bring back that Black commerce, or bring back that vibrancy from a Black residential space? So there are frameworks that exist. You have to search and reapply, and start crafting that and working toward that goal.
I'm sorry, we have an audience comment right
I just got one question. Woodward, you talk about affordable housing. You talking about affordable housing, or you talking about low income housing? Because in Mount Pleasant, affordable is 400,000. And even, workforce housing is 300,000. And, you know, that's still out of the realm of a lot of people. So what you talking about, affordable and low-income houses?
Low-income houses is different from affordable housing. When I say affordable housing, I'm looking at the HUD's AMI, right? Anywhere between what we're going to be building for 50 to 80%. Now, I have a house right now that we built, and it has been appraised at $340,000. We will not sell it for no more than $200,000, and I'm working on a plan, because I have what we call a pricing formula based on the person's income, and we have put in a huge percentage of subsidy in that where we did not get a loan. I don't like to say free money, but it was money that we don't have to pay back. And so, since we don't have to pay it back, we don't obligate the homeowners to buy it at the price that has been appraised at.
I just thought I'd say a word or two about public transit in this part of the city. Public transit is a big way to keep things affordable because a family's got to pay for a car and rent is under a huge burden. This area still has the 213 dash route, which doesn't run often enough, but it does need to recover its numbers as they push people out of the area and replace them with wealthier people. The number of people riding the bus is going down. And this area has already lost the Rutgers Road and the Beltline bus lines in the past 20 years. There's been a tremendous reduction in the amount of transit available on the west side of Charleston. The long-term plans are to bring the end of the new rapid transit system into a parking lot very near Gadsden Green, and that should be good for the community. But people need to ride these transit services, and I don't understand why Publix did not have a bus stop in front of them.
Yes, it
And
does.
they sold that development to the community on, you're going to get a grocery store. And the bus runs by the grocery store, but there's nowhere to sit down with your bags as you wait for your bus to arrive.
Come on.
And the city's supposed to require developers to put bus stops in when they develop property. And I thank everybody that's helped me fight for the transit we do have. It never ends. And I know the fights for housing is related to it. I thank all of y'all.
Thank you for that comment. Yeah, I think we gotta wrap up. We have one more panel for you guys today, but thank you so much for all the panelists. That was really informative.
It's not even my resource. Matt brought you all an incredible resource that I think you should take if you have a lot of questions about it. Just know that that's like a real resource, and that Matt is the head of that work, but also like helping us with new training and actually litigating. So like, I just want you to know that that is a resource that's here and valuable.
Let's give a round of applause for our panelists.